Josh Hawley thought he had Kamala Harris cornered with a fierce legal argument, but when she spoke, it was a moment that left him, and the entire country, in shock. The Senate chamber was buzzing, filled with the kind of tension only politics can create. Josh Hawley stood at the podium, eyes sharp, a gleam of arrogance dancing across his face. The camera zoomed in, catching the smirk on his lips as he made his final move in the debate. His voice rang out, dripping with conviction, aimed squarely at Kamala Harris. "You stand there, Senator Harris, hiding behind a facade of legalese and moral superiority, but you can't escape the truth. Your policies have failed, your ideals are dangerous, and this country deserves better than a leader who deflects with jargon and legal loopholes." The room was electric. His supporters cheered, their applause reverberating through the chamber like a wave of vindication. It was the kind of moment Hawley lived for, the kind where you could feel the crowd shift, where you could almost taste victory. His words hung in the air, waiting for a response, his eyes flickering toward Harris as if daring her to challenge him. Kamala Harris, however, did not rise in anger. She did not shout. She did not raise her voice at all. The cameras panned to her, and for a brief moment, the nation held its breath. Her expression was calm, controlled, almost serene, but there was a quiet intensity behind her gaze. Her eyes locked on Hawley, unwavering, as the room fell into an almost unnatural silence. She didn't need to speak loudly. She didn't need to fight back with fire or fury. What she had was something more deadly, precision. She stood, slowly, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Senator Hawley," she began, her words measured, each one deliberate, "you've built your argument on a foundation of misinterpretation and fear. But the law doesn't care for theatrics. It speaks only in facts." The chamber froze. The entire room, Hawley's supporters, his allies, even the indifferent senators who had been waiting for this moment, held their breath. Harris continued, unbothered by the weight of their attention. With a quiet flourish, she delivered the legal point, the argument so sharp, so flawless, it left no room for rebuttal. A collective gasp swept through the chamber. Hawley's smirk faltered, and for the first time, he looked unsure. His confidence cracked. The audience, watching from the comfort of their homes, felt it too. This wasn't just a debate. It wasn't just politics. It was the moment when the impossible happened. Josh Hawley, self-assured, arrogant, the great conservative champion, had been outclassed, outmaneuvered, and silenced. The camera zoomed in on his face, his jaw tightening. His eyes flickered, momentarily lost. But the question hung in the air: what happens when the nation watches its top champion fall from grace? The Senate chamber wasn't just the stage for a debate, it was the battleground where the soul of American democracy was being tested. In one corner stood Kamala Harris, calm, calculated, unshaken, representing a legal tradition grounded in facts, justice, and a fierce commitment to equality. In the other corner, Josh Hawley, rising star of the populist right, armed with rhetoric that could ignite crowds, but falter when confronted with truth. It was a clash of ideologies that went far beyond policy differences. This was a fight for the very future of the nation's legal framework, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The air in the chamber crackled with an almost electric tension. Cameras flashed. The American people were watching. The stage was set, and the lines had been drawn. This wasn't just another political dispute, it was a defining moment, one that would reverberate across the nation and through history. What Harris and Hawley were about to clash over wasn't just a bill or a law, it was the fate of American law itself. The outcome of this confrontation would shape the future of judicial interpretation, the role of the government in people's lives, and the country's commitment to fairness. Hawley had built his career on stirring up the masses. His populist brand was predicated on speaking the language of anger and fear. His base thrived on the rhetoric of us versus them, the idea that the so-called elites in Washington had sold out the American people. With every speech, with every statement, he amplified the anger of those who felt left behind. He was a master at using the language of the people, drawing battle lines in ways that seemed to resonate with an emotionally charged electorate. But Kamala Harris was a different kind of force. Her intellect was her weapon. Her commitment to the Constitution, her legal expertise, and her calm, deliberate manner made her the embodiment of the principles America was built on. To her, the law wasn't a tool to whip up outrage or manipulate emotions, it was a foundation, something that transcended the moment, something that should serve the people, not the powerful. When she spoke in the language of reason, of clarity, of fairness. And that was exactly why this moment was so critical. It wasn't just a legal debate, it was an ideological showdown. It was the clash of populism versus legal integrity, of the loud, charismatic promise of change versus the quiet but steady resolve of justice. Each argument Kamala Harris presented wasn't just a response, it was a rebuke of everything Hawley stood for. Every legal point she made was a defense of an ideal that the American people could not afford to lose, the ideal of justice over spectacle, of truth over lies. As Harris stood there, the weight of the moment was undeniable. This was bigger than the two of them. This was a battle for the future. If Harris lost, if Hawley's reckless rhetoric won, it would be a turning point. Populist rhetoric would dominate, unchecked by the careful scrutiny of the law. It would set a precedent where the truth no longer mattered, where the courts could be swayed by emotional appeals instead of legal reasoning. The nation would be at risk of losing its most powerful safeguard, the rule of law itself. The pressure was mounting, the stakes growing by the second. With every word exchanged, the future seemed to teeter on a knife's edge. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every nuance, every shift in expression. Viewers at home could feel it, something monumental was happening. A political battle was unfolding with repercussions far beyond the walls of the Senate. The nation was on the edge of its seat. And as the world watched, they knew this moment wasn't just a passing political squabble. No, this was history in the making. What happened here would echo through the courts, through the media, through the very fabric of American society for years to come. If Kamala Harris emerged victorious, the ideals of fairness, intellect, and justice would win the day. If Hawley succeeded, a new age of political grandstanding and fear-mongering would take root. The implications for the law, for the country's future, were incalculable. The battle was far from over. But what happened next would decide everything. Josh Hawley knew exactly what kind of figure he wanted to be. A defender of the common man, a fighter against the Washington elite. He carved out this persona in the heart of Missouri, weaving together populist rhetoric, conservative values, and a flair for the dramatic. From the moment he stepped onto the national stage, he knew exactly how to command attention. And for a while, that was all he needed. Born into privilege, raised in a comfortable, well-connected family, Hawley's rise seemed almost inevitable. He attended prestigious schools, earning degrees that should have equipped him with the tools of reason, logic, and legal expertise. But somewhere along the way, Hawley decided that those tools were too quiet, too measured for a world that demanded spectacle. So, he discarded them, replacing intellectual rigor with a more potent weapon, performance. He didn't need to be the smartest person in the room, he just needed to sound like the smartest. He didn't need to craft his arguments with nuance, he just needed to land a punch. The raw emotion in his voice, the sharp tone, the pithy sound bites, all of it became his brand. It wasn't enough for him to argue for policy changes, he needed to be seen as a champion for the people, a hero fighting back against the so-called elites. And he did it well. Too well. Hawley's rise was fueled by this magnetic charisma, his ability to whip up crowds with his bombastic speeches and confrontational style. He spoke with conviction, dressed in the language of rebellion, one that both comforted and stoked the anger of those who felt left behind. When he railed against the establishment, against corporations, against the media, he did so with such intensity that it was easy to forget one glaring truth: he was, in fact, a product of that very system. Despite his populist posturing, Hawley's policies often betrayed his true inclinations. He claimed to represent the working class, but many of his proposals benefited the powerful, the wealthy, the very elites he often vilified. His connections with big money donors, his quiet endorsement of corporate interests, and his expensive lifestyle painted a stark contradiction to the image he sold to the public. But this wasn't a man concerned with consistency, it was a man obsessed with optics, with being seen in the right way, at the right time. And so, the people cheered. The crowds went wild. He was the voice of the voiceless. The man who would shake up Washington, take down the system, and fight for the forgotten. But all of it, the charm, the speeches, the performances, was just that. Performance. But the truth was starting to show cracks. Hawley's arrogance was his greatest asset and his greatest flaw. He became convinced that he could outmaneuver anyone in a debate, that his skill with words could cut through any opposition. In a world where emotional appeal often trumped fact, Hawley thought he had the perfect strategy. He could bait his opponents, rattle them, overwhelm them with sheer force of will. He believed that if he could just deliver the right soundbite, make the right gesture, the crowd would do the rest of the work for him. This belief in his own invincibility made him reckless. He often overlooked the details, the legal intricacies, the subtleties of the arguments he was supposed to engage with. The law, in his mind, wasn't something to be respected or understood, it was something to be molded to fit his narrative. So, when he stood before the Senate, it wasn't about presenting the most cogent, well-supported argument. It was about winning. About dominating. About proving that he could hold his own against anyone, regardless of the facts. But there was a problem with this approach. It was fine when he was playing to a crowd, when he was on the campaign trail or giving speeches in front of adoring supporters. But this was a different arena. This was the Senate. And the Senate was not a place for theatrical displays, it was a place for substance, for precision. And that's where Hawley's hubris began to show. He had never expected to face someone like Kamala Harris. He had been in enough debates, enough political scraps, to believe he could handle any opponent with ease. He thought his style, his fire, his raw passion, was all it took to win. And when he stepped into the ring with Harris, he expected her to flinch, to falter under his verbal onslaught. After all, wasn't that how these things went? The louder, the more forceful, the more emotionally charged argument usually triumphed. But Kamala Harris didn't flinch. Kamala Harris didn't react at all. And that was where Hawley's arrogance met its first serious obstacle. Because when she spoke, it wasn't with a shout or a punch. It was with calm, measured precision, something Hawley could never replicate. Where he relied on his performance, she relied on the law. And the law didn't care about his bluster. The more he tried to rattle her, the more he realized he was losing ground. Kamala Harris was playing a different game, one where emotion wasn't enough. She was prepared. She knew the law. And she wasn't about to be manipulated by theatrics. For the first time, Josh Hawley's confidence began to slip. His bluster faltered. His carefully honed persona, the one that had carried him this far, wasn't enough to win this fight. And the audience, the people who had been mesmerized by his performances, could feel it. They weren't watching a champion anymore. They were watching a man who had been exposed. Kamala Harris was never supposed to be here. Not according to the world's expectations. But then again, the world had never truly understood her. Born in Oakland, California, to immigrant parents, her mother, Shyamala, a scientist from India, and her father, Donald, a professor from Jamaica, Kamala grew up in a household where the pursuit of knowledge and justice wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. From the very beginning, she understood that life wasn't just about getting ahead, it was about creating the kind of world where others could thrive too. Her childhood was shaped by the struggle for equality. Her mother, a tireless advocate for civil rights, instilled in her a sense of justice that would never waver. Kamala's parents were committed to the idea that her generation would not just succeed in the traditional sense, they would fight for something bigger, a world that valued fairness, dignity, and opportunity for all. It wasn't enough to dream of success, Kamala's parents taught her that you had to demand it for everyone, especially those who had been denied it for far too long. As a child, Kamala faced her fair share of challenges. She wasn't exempt from the harsh realities of racial inequality. She could see it in the way people looked at her, in the way they spoke to her, and even in the way she was treated by some of the very systems that were supposed to protect her. But rather than succumb to these forces, Kamala developed an unwavering resolve to fight against them. The experiences of racism, bias, and inequality didn't break her, they hardened her, forged her into someone who would not let injustice go unanswered. Kamala's path into politics was not a straight line. It was marked by determination, grit, and a deep understanding of the systemic issues that plagued America. She excelled at Howard University, one of the country's premier historically black colleges, where she was known not just for her academic brilliance but also for her activism. There, she found her voice, one that would not be silenced by the status quo. At Howard, she realized that true leadership wasn't about power for its own sake, it was about using your position to fight for those who had been ignored, oppressed, and left behind. That realization would carry her throughout her career. Her journey didn't stop there. Kamala went on to graduate from the University of California, Hastings College of the Law, where she would go on to become a prosecutor. It was in the courtroom that Kamala truly came into her own. As a prosecutor, she earned a reputation for being meticulous, intelligent, and fiercely dedicated to justice. Her opponents feared her not just for her legal expertise, but because she didn't back down from a fight, even when the odds were stacked against her. She understood the intricacies of the law, what it said and what it should mean, and used it as a tool to dismantle the systems that kept people in chains, whether it was in the criminal justice system or in the halls of power. But it was her commitment to criminal justice reform that would define her as a leader. Kamala didn't just sit behind a desk in the DA's office, she rolled up her sleeves and fought for policies that would create lasting change. She worked tirelessly to implement programs that would divert young people from prison, focused on rehabilitation over punishment, and challenged policies that disproportionately affected black and brown communities. Her approach was always grounded in the belief that justice was about more than winning cases, it was about making sure that everyone, no matter their background or circumstance, was treated with dignity and respect. Kamala's reputation as a prosecutor eventually earned her a seat in the California Senate, where she would continue to fight for the marginalized and disenfranchised. As Attorney General of California, she brought forward progressive policies that challenged the establishment, often at great political cost. She stood firm on issues like criminal justice reform, healthcare access, and economic equity. She was an unwavering advocate for the rights of immigrants, women, and the LGBTQ+ community, proving time and time again that her commitment to justice wasn't just political, it was personal. When she became the first woman of South Asian and African descent to serve as Vice President of the United States, it was both a historic achievement and a culmination of a lifetime of fighting for what was right. But Kamala never forgot where she came from or the people who needed her most. Every decision she made, every policy she championed, was grounded in the struggles of her youth and the lessons taught to her by her mother and father. Kamala had faced down injustice time and time again, but this fight would demand every ounce of her legal expertise and composure. This wasn't just another courtroom. This wasn't just another argument. This was the Senate, the place where laws were made, and broken, and where the future of America's legal system was being decided in real time. She wasn't just up against a political opponent, she was up against a movement that threatened to undermine everything she had fought for. This was a battle for the soul of the nation, and Kamala Harris knew that the only way to win it was with the quiet, unwavering strength that had always carried her forward. As the moment of confrontation with Josh Hawley loomed, Kamala stood ready, not because she was invincible, but because she had been shaped by the very forces that sought to destroy the ideals she held dear. She had spent her life navigating and dismantling the systems that were designed to keep her down, and now, she would use every ounce of her strength to ensure that justice would prevail. The stakes were higher than ever, but Kamala Harris was prepared to fight for the future of the country. The tension in the Senate chamber was thick, the air almost electric with anticipation. The crowd was on edge, waiting for what would come next. Josh Hawley, the embodiment of populist bravado, had found his rhythm. He had launched his attack, and now he was pushing, leaning into every word, his voice rising with the kind of righteous indignation that had made him a darling of the right. But Kamala Harris, standing across from him, remained as calm as ever, her posture unwavering, her expression measured. The more Hawley spoke, the more the room seemed to tighten around them. He was on the offensive now, aiming to catch Harris off guard, to bait her into a misstep. His questions were sharp, aggressive, designed to rattle her. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on her, daring her to slip up. "Senator Harris," he began, his voice dripping with disdain, "you claim to champion justice, to be the protector of the law. But how do you justify the overreach of government in the name of equality? Where does it end? Are you willing to trample the rights of individual citizens just to impose your own version of what's just?" The room shifted uncomfortably. Hawley's rhetoric echoed through the chamber, his supporters nodding, waiting for the crowd to turn. He'd done this 100 times before. He knew the power of a good question, a question that could hang in the air, unanswered, like a grenade just waiting to explode. Harris didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her voice, when it came, was as steady as a metronome, each word precise and deliberate. "Senator Hawley, what you're talking about is not overreach. It's a commitment to justice, to fairness. The law has always been a tool for protecting people, particularly those who have been marginalized. We don't compromise the rights of individuals for political gain. What we fight for, Senator, is equality under the law for every American. Your version of justice leaves far too many behind." Hawley scowled, his eyes narrowing. He had expected her to be rattled by the implication that her policies were authoritarian. Instead, she had deftly turned the question back on him, reinforcing her position with the legal principles he had hoped to undermine. The audience shifted, murmurs passing between the senators, watching the two of them as if the world was hanging on their next words. But Hawley wasn't ready to give up yet. He had prepared for this. He knew his lines. He knew the emotional hooks that would stir the room, and he was determined to land one. "Don't give me that, Senator. You know as well as I do that your policies only serve to create division, to incite unrest. You're inflaming tensions across the country, pushing a radical agenda that ignores the voices of everyday Americans." He gestured broadly, pointing to the gallery above them, as if his words were about to ignite a wildfire of support. The chamber seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Harris's response. Hawley's voice was now filled with passion, his delivery almost theatrical. He knew how to play the room. He knew how to turn a simple debate into a performance. But once again, Harris remained calm. She wasn't drawn in by the emotional crescendo of his rhetoric. She wasn't moved by the spectacle he was creating. "Senator," she said, her tone unwavering, "radical agendas aren't about advancing equality. They're about division and fear. My work, my policies, have always been grounded in bringing people together, in ensuring that no one is left behind. The laws we fight for are not radical, they are fundamental. We are a nation founded on the idea that all people are created equal under the law. That's not a radical idea. That's an American idea." Her words cut through the noise like a scalpel. The tension in the room was palpable now. Hawley's frustration was growing, he could feel the tide beginning to turn. He was used to winning debates by drowning out his opponents, overpowering them with volume and fury. But Harris wasn't going to be overwhelmed. She wasn't here for the spectacle. She was here to win with substance. Hawley's face flushed. He couldn't hide it. His whole strategy was built on the belief that facts didn't matter, emotion was the key, that his supporters would back him if he could get them angry enough. But Harris wasn't playing that game. She wasn't rattling, she wasn't rising to the bait. Her precision was his kryptonite, and it was beginning to show. "Enough of your grandstanding, Senator Harris," Hawley snapped, now visibly annoyed. "You can keep hiding behind legal jargon, but at the end of the day, it's the American people who will decide. You don't get to control the conversation. You don't get to dictate the future of this country." Harris leaned in slightly, her voice still calm, still precise. I'm not dictating anything, Senator. I'm protecting what the Constitution guarantees for every American. The people you claim to represent deserve a government that works for them, not one that caters to the powerful and leaves everyone else behind. It was a direct hit. The room fell silent. Harris had shifted the conversation back to the core of the debate: justice, fairness, the rule of law. And in that moment it was clear to everyone in the chamber, Josh Hawley's bluster, his emotional appeal, could not stand up to her legal acumen, her understanding of what was truly at stake. Hawley's face twisted, frustration boiling just beneath the surface. His plan was unraveling before his eyes. He had tried to dominate the debate with anger and rhetoric, but Harris wasn't fighting with emotion, she was fighting with precision. She had the legal expertise, the clarity of purpose, and the unshakable resolve to outlast him. The audience could feel it now, the tipping point was near. One of them would have to break. And it wasn't going to be Kamala Harris. The next move would define everything. The tension in the chamber reached a breaking point. Josh Hawley, visibly frustrated, knew he had to deliver the final blow, his last shot at securing the debate. He could feel the crowd leaning away from him. Kamala Harris, calm and composed, had been systematically dismantling every argument he threw at her. His rhetoric, once filled with fire and passion, had turned into mere noise. But there was one thing he hadn't counted on, her ability to stay on message, to keep bringing everything back to the truth. His moment had arrived. With a deep breath, Hawley stood tall, chest puffed out as if preparing to land the knockout punch. His voice dropped, becoming almost theatrical, as he summoned every ounce of his trademark bravado. "Senator Harris, let me remind you," he began, his eyes narrowing as he aimed his words like daggers, "you are standing here, not as a defender of justice, but as a defender of an establishment that has failed the American people. The same establishment that has kept working-class families in the dark while politicians like you have made deals with corporations and special interests. You're part of the system that people are desperate to change. And you stand here, pretending to be the voice of the people, while you protect the very forces that oppress them. Your brand of so-called justice has done nothing but perpetuate the status quo." He paused for effect, his face flushed with the intensity of his words. "You may call it fairness, but all you've done is shield the powerful and strip away the rights of ordinary Americans. This isn't about justice. It's about control. You control the narrative, you control the law, and you continue to keep the people in their place." The room hung in the balance, every senator and every viewer at home waiting for Harris to react. Hawley's supporters were on the edge of their seats, waiting for her to flounder, waiting for her to falter under the weight of his scorn. But Kamala Harris didn't flinch. She didn't lean forward or get lost in the trap of emotion. She didn't play to the crowd. She simply stood tall, her composure unwavering, her eyes focused on him, as if she were seeing right through him. And then, in the silence that followed, she spoke. "Senator Hawley," she said, her voice cool and controlled, "you claim to speak for the people, but what you're really doing is exploiting their fears. You talk about the people, but you've never truly represented them. You represent the wealthy few, the ones who can afford to manipulate the system for their own gain, while you continue to stir up anger, to pit people against each other. You aren't offering solutions. You're offering division. And the law, Senator, the law doesn't thrive on division. The law is meant to unite us, to ensure equality for all. But you've turned it into a weapon to further your own ambitions." She took a step forward, letting the weight of her words sink in. Every eye in the room was on her now. Even Hawley, who had been brimming with confidence moments ago, seemed to pause, caught off guard by her calmness. "You want to talk about the status quo, Senator?" Kamala continued. "The status quo you talk about is a system that's been built on centuries of inequality that has left millions of Americans marginalized. The very system you defend is the one that continues to favor the powerful, the ones who look like you and me, while people of color, immigrants, and the working class are left to bear the weight of this so-called system you're trying to preserve. You say you're for the people, but what you're really for is keeping them in their place. And that, Senator, is where we part ways. The chamber was silent. Not a murmur, not a rustle. Just the sound of Hawley's words hanging in the air, and the stark contrast of Harris's calm, unwavering truth. Kamala's eyes locked with his, and in that moment, it was clear, she wasn't just refuting his arguments, she was exposing them for what they were, flawed, dangerous, and built on a foundation of fear. She wasn't just winning a debate. She was winning a war of ideas. Let's talk about the law, Senator, she continued, her voice picking up momentum. You claim to be a defender of freedom, yet your agenda seeks to strip away the very freedoms that make this country great. You want to roll back civil rights, you want to limit access to healthcare, you want to close our borders and deny people the rights they've fought for. You want to turn back the clock on everything this country has fought for. And yet you stand here, acting as though you are the voice of progress. Hawley's face was a mask of frustration now, his jaw clenched tight. He had no retort. He couldn't match her legal knowledge, her understanding of the Constitution, her deep connection to the very ideals he claimed to defend. He had spent his career playing to the emotional, the sensational, the loud. But Kamala Harris wasn't just playing a game of rhetoric. She was playing a game of truth. Kamala's final blow was delivered with a quiet strength, but it struck with the force of a hammer. Senator, your rhetoric is dangerous. Your version of justice is nothing more than a charade. You talk about protecting the people, but you do so by exploiting their fears. You want a divided America, because in division, there is power. But I believe in a better America. I believe in an America that stands together, that unites in the face of adversity, and that fights for justice for all, no matter who you are, where you come from, or how much money you have. The room was still, the silence deafening. Harris's words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Even Hawley seemed to deflate. His bravado, his swagger, gone. The powerful force of his rhetoric had been met with the clarity and precision of Kamala's legal mind, and it was clear who had won the battle. Hawley's face was a mix of shock, frustration, and anger. He had no response. The force of Kamala's words had left him speechless, exposed. The audience, both in the room and watching from home, could feel it. This was the moment. Kamala Harris had not just refuted his claims, she had destroyed them. And in that silence, as the camera zoomed in on Hawley's stunned expression, the room knew one thing for certain, the debate was over. Kamala Harris had won, not with emotion, but with intellect, precision, and unwavering truth. The ripple effects of the Senate debate reverberated far beyond the marble walls of the chamber. In the moments after Kamala Harris's devastating rebuttal, social media exploded into action. Within seconds, hashtags like #HawleyBeaten and #KamalaWins began trending across every platform. Thousands of tweets, posts, and memes flooded the internet, each capturing the electrifying moment when Harris had silenced her opponent with her sharp legal precision. The clips went viral faster than anyone had anticipated. On Twitter, the sentiment was clear. Hawley just got served. #KamalaWins, one tweet read, followed by thousands of likes and retweets. Another user posted a short video of Harris delivering her final blow, captioning it, "When you bring facts to a knife fight." #HawleyBeaten #KamalaWins. The comments section was a whirlwind of praise for Harris. Progressives, moderates, and even many disillusioned conservatives praised her intellectual prowess, with one tweet going viral, reading, "That's how you shut down populism with the law." As the social media world caught fire, news outlets across the country began to pick up on the historic moment. CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News ran extensive segments on the debate, with anchors analyzing the consequences of Harris's victory. The phrase, "legal victory," became a common refrain on news channels. Pundits were in awe of Harris's calm, measured approach in the face of Hawley's emotional, populist tirades. She was a master of the law, they said, and had proved that intellectual rigor could trump rhetoric any day. But it wasn't just the left-leaning outlets that were impressed. Conservative commentators and analysts, many of whom had previously written off Harris's legal expertise, were now forced to acknowledge the sheer force of her argument. On a panel on Fox News, one pundit said, "Whether you like her policies or not, there's no denying her command of the law." That was a masterclass in legal debate. Hawley was outclassed. The respect for Harris's ability to hold her own and expose Hawley's contradictions became a focal point of the media. Even right-wing outlets that had questioned her competence as vice president now recognized her as a formidable political force. Her victory wasn't just about the argument, it was about her ability to remain unshaken and focused, a true embodiment of intellectual strength in a world often dominated by emotional appeals. The shockwaves of the debate spread quickly into the world of celebrities and public figures. Hollywood icons, civil rights leaders, and activists couldn't resist chiming in, voicing their admiration for Harris's performance. "Kamala Harris just showed America what real leadership looks like," actress Kerry Washington tweeted. "Facts over fear. Every single time. #Kamala wins." The hashtags continued to dominate the conversation. The #Kamala wins movement wasn't just a reaction to a single debate, it was a call for intellectual and moral leadership, a declaration that integrity and law could still triumph over populist fear-mongering. Celebrities, from musicians to athletes, joined in the chorus, amplifying Harris's message and showing solidarity with her victory. Meanwhile, the reaction from Hawley's allies was more defensive. Behind closed doors, they scrambled to salvage his image. Several Republican leaders rushed to his side, sending out statements and tweets in an attempt to downplay the severity of his loss. "It's just one debate," said a prominent conservative strategist. "We'll be back in the fight." But it was too late. The damage had been done. Hawley's attempts to reframe the debate fell flat. He appeared on multiple news networks, trying to explain away the crushing defeat. "What you saw was just a part of the narrative. There's a bigger issue at stake here," he insisted, but his words lacked conviction. His supporters on social media attempted to rally behind him, but the momentum had clearly shifted. "I'll be back," he posted on Twitter later that night, but the replies were harsh. "You just got schooled, man," and "maybe next time bring facts instead of fear." The more Hawley defended his position, the more it became clear that he had lost the battle of ideas. His bravado, his populist rhetoric, had been exposed for what it was, a flimsy, shallow performance that couldn't withstand the weight of legal scrutiny. The battle wasn't about the crowd anymore, it was about who had the truth on their side. And Kamala Harris had proven that she wasn't just another politician, she was a force to be reckoned with, someone who could stand firm in the face of a political storm and emerge victorious. For Harris, this wasn't just a victory in the Senate, it was a victory for her vision of America. The nation was now aware, more than ever, that she was a leader not just because of her position, but because of her dedication to principles, to fairness, to justice. She had demonstrated that leadership wasn't about giving in to populist demands or sensationalism, it was about standing firm in the face of pressure and using knowledge and reason to guide the way forward. As the hours passed and the news cycle continued, one thing became indisputable: Kamala Harris had solidified her place as a political and legal force. No longer would she be seen simply as a vice president or a figurehead, she had proven herself as someone who could command the national conversation, shape the future of political discourse, and rise above the noise. The country was watching, and they had just witnessed the dawn of a new kind of leader. In Washington, whispers of admiration for Harris grew louder, and among the American people, a sense of collective empowerment began to swell. Kamala Harris had not only triumphed in that chamber, she had reignited a belief that justice, intellect, and integrity could still hold the upper hand in the battle for the soul of the nation. The storm was over. The dust was settling. And Kamala Harris was standing tall. The Senate chamber had emptied, the cameras had long stopped rolling, and the world had already begun to move on. But for Kamala Harris, the battle wasn't just about winning a debate or silencing a political opponent. It was about something much deeper, something that resonated beyond the confines of the Senate floor and into the heart of every citizen who had been watching. This was about a fundamental principle, that truth, dignity, and justice are the bedrock of the American ideal, and those who uphold them will always emerge stronger, no matter the noise. As the aftermath of the debate echoed through the media, Harris took a quiet moment to reflect on what had transpired. This wasn't just a legal victory. This was a victory for everything she had stood for, everything she had fought for, and everything she knew to be true. In that moment, she understood that her role wasn't merely to represent a party, an agenda, or a movement, it was to embody the very values that made America what it was meant to be. Hawley had brought the noise. He had stirred emotions, thrown out fiery rhetoric, and tried to manipulate the moment with passion and performance. But Kamala Harris had responded with something far more enduring, substance. She had wielded the power of knowledge, of law, of facts. She had stood firm in the face of populism and fear-mongering, never swaying from the values that had always guided her, the belief that the law is meant to serve everyone, that justice must be blind, and that leadership is about lifting others, not dividing them. This victory wasn't just for her, it was for everyone who believed in those values. It was for every American who still believed that our system of justice was something worth protecting. It was for the people who felt they didn't have a voice but saw in Kamala Harris someone who would speak for them, someone who would stand up to the forces that tried to silence them. And in that moment, as the world continued to buzz with the aftermath, Harris knew this was just the beginning. True leadership, she had said in the debate, is not about dominating with words, but about using them to elevate others. And now, as she reflected on the outpouring of support, the admiration from both sides of the aisle, and the powerful wave of collective empowerment that had swept through the nation, she realized just how important that message was. True leadership wasn't built on fear. It wasn't built on division or conflict. It was built on the courage to stand firm, the integrity to stand for what's right, and the humility to listen to those you serve. Kamala knew that this moment had captured the attention of millions, but what truly mattered was what came next. She wasn't going to rest on the laurels of one debate victory. She was going to keep fighting, keep standing for the people, keep bringing truth and justice into every corner of the nation. The fight for justice never ends. The fight for equality never ends. And those who lead with honesty, compassion, and conviction will always find their place, no matter how loud the opposition becomes. As the nation digested the news, the moral of the story was clear. It was never about who could shout the loudest or who could make the most dramatic gestures. It was about who could offer something real. In a world where so many had grown tired of empty promises and divisive rhetoric, Kamala Harris had offered something different, a vision of leadership rooted in values that transcend politics. Leadership that wasn't about who had the most followers or the most support in the moment, but about who could stand the test of time. The victory was more than a personal triumph. It was a reminder to the American people that their ideals were still worth fighting for. Truth, dignity, and justice had not been lost. They were alive and well, embodied in Kamala Harris. And as the ripple effects of the debate spread across the country, it was clear that this was a turning point, a reminder that the things that truly matter, integrity, respect, and the pursuit of justice, could still win the day. The feeling of empowerment was palpable. Across social media, in homes, in classrooms, in workplaces, people were discussing what had just happened, but they weren't just discussing the debate. They were discussing something far deeper, the kind of world they wanted to live in. A world where truth is stronger than lies. A world where justice is more powerful than fear. A world where leadership is measured by what you stand for, not by the volume of your voice. And as the days passed, the message that Kamala Harris had sent out into the world didn't fade. It wasn't just a victory, it was a call to action. A call to all those who believed in fairness and equality to stand tall, to speak their truth, and to fight for a better future. Kamala's victory wasn't just about one debate. It was about what it represented, the triumph of substance over spectacle, of dignity over division. In that moment, the nation felt a collective surge of hope. Because they had seen, in Kamala Harris, what true leadership looks like. And it wasn't just a moment of victory, it was a new beginning. As she closed her eyes for just a moment, Kamala Harris knew that her fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And with each step forward, she would continue to uphold the values that had made her who she was, values that would guide the nation to a better, fairer future. Kamala Harris has shown us what true leadership looks like, leadership rooted in knowledge, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to justice. In a world that often values rhetoric over reason, she stood tall, a beacon of what's possible when you bring intellect and compassion to the table. Her victory wasn't just about one debate, it was about the triumph of substance over spectacle, of truth over lies. Harris didn't just win the day with her legal acumen, she reminded us that real leadership isn't about dominating with noise, it's about lifting others up, staying true to your values, and standing firm for what's right, no matter the pressure. This is the kind of leadership we need more of. It's the kind of leadership that will guide us forward, that will break through the noise, and restore a sense of dignity to our nation. So, what comes next? The fight for truth and justice doesn't stop here. This moment, this victory, is just the beginning. Kamala Harris has shown us the way, but now it's up to us to carry that torch forward. Share this moment with the world, because the values she stands for, the fight she's leading, it's a fight we all must be part of. Join the movement that values knowledge over rhetoric, dignity over division, and justice over fear. Subscribe, share, and stay in the fight for a better tomorrow. Together, we can build a future where truth and integrity lead the way. Let's keep pushing, let's keep fighting, and let's keep standing for what's right. Share this message, because the truth matters, and so do you.